Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. It's about that time, folks. It's time for the first opening day roster projection of 2025.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air at 97.5 The Fanatic, doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure that you're rating and reviewing. If you're listening to this in podcast form, we're available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching us on YouTube and you have not subscribed yet to the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel, it's free. It's easy. It'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. Just go to the Locked On Phillies channel, hit that subscribe button, and it really helps us out here as well. So anyone who's done that, thank you very much. Anyone who's going to, I would really appreciate it. It helps you keep up on all the news as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. We got some fun stuff for you in today's episode. We're going to do our first roster. I said projection. We'll call it more of a prediction because, I guess those words are interchangeable, but I'm going to lead off today's episode with the first 26-man projection that I think is going to be the roster on opening day. There are a couple of positions that are completely up for grabs. So I'm taking a shot in the dark at a couple of these, but we will see how accurate I am and how this changes as we move forward in the spring training time period. We're also going to talk about the MLB All-Under 25 team. An athletic writer put out his picks for the best MLB players under the age of 25. And there's a Philly on there, but there's only one. So I'll tell you who it is and why it's very interesting that that's the one that they picked. And we've got a fun exercise as part of Mailbag Monday. Now, I know you might be saying, Connor, it's Tuesday. Yesterday, I had to go to the dentist. I had to get some dental work done. I couldn't feel the left side of my face for a little bit, and I couldn't talk. So sorry about no episode. We'll make it up a little bit later on in the week. But let's get started on the first roster projection of the year. In past years, it's been more difficult to make these projections. This year, well, as the Phillies continue to run stuff back and cement who's going to be where, it becomes easier and easier to predict everything. So we're going to start with the catchers, work through the position players, the starters, and then the relievers. Starting with the catchers, the first one's easy. JT Realmuto is always going to be on this team as long as he's under contract. JT Realmuto is your starting catcher. The backup catcher is also easy. I'm telling you, it's easy. Rafael Marchand's going to be the backup catcher for this team. Garrett Stubbs has a minor league option. Rafael Marchand does not. If Marchand does not make the team, the Phillies lose his rights. He will go through waivers. He will be picked up by another team. He will be on another team's roster. He's talented enough and projectable enough that someone else will have him. So you have to have him on the major league roster. He's your backup catcher. There's no doubt in my mind that the Phillies are breaking camp with Rafael Marchand as their backup catcher. So that's already 2 of the 26 down. Now let's go through the infielders here. We know that Bryce Harper is going to be starting at first base. Bryson Stott at second. Trey Turner at short. Alec Boehm at third. So there's your first 4. Now, you need a couple of depth pieces. You really need 3 depth pieces on the roster as far as everything's concerned. And I've got a couple of names here that I think will be the guys that round things out. And part of this is just experience. So, of course, Edmundo Sosa is going to also be on the team. Now, he may play some outfield. I've got him here with the infielders. So Sosa is going to be on the team. Cody Clemens, I have, is making the team as one of the depth pieces in the infield. Now, he can play outfield if he needs to. He's better as a first base depth option behind Bryce Harper. Cody Clemens, I have making the team. I just realized that I missed somebody, actually. That's entirely on me. Cody Clemens, sorry, buddy. You're cut because I somehow missed Kyle Schwarber's name when I was writing all this down. I was like, how do I not have Kyle Schwarber on here? He's with the outfielders. We'll get to that in a second. Edmundo Sosa is going to be the infield depth. You're going to have 3 depth pieces in the outfield. Schwarber, technically an outfielder, is a DH guy. He has been working on some infield stuff. The outfield depth, I have Weston Wilson filling that out, and I have Johan Rojas making the team. Now, if you want to have Clemens make it over Rojas and you believe Sosa can play some outfield, well, then you may have Cody Clemens. But right now, I think Rojas is going to make it. I think Weston Wilson is going to be the final bench spot. And then the starting outfield, obviously, is Max Kepler, Brandon Marsh, Nick Castellanos. Marsh, Rojas, that competition in center field could change, but whoever doesn't win the starting spot, I think is going to be a depth piece on this team. I'm not sure about Wilson, and I'm not sure about Rojas. I'm definitely less sure about Wilson than Johan Rojas. But everybody else at this point is a virtual lock, short of injury, knock on wood, to make the roster. So there are your position players for the Phillies. I'll run through it one more time. Remuto, Marchand, Harper, Stott, Turner, Bohm, Sosa, Kepler, Marsh, Rojas, Castellanos, Schwarber, Weston Wilson making the major league squad out of camp, which would be an awesome story for him. Just by guess at this point, that's the one that's going to be a little bit variable as we dive deeper into spring training. The starting rotation's locked down. Say it with me, folks. Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Suarez, Jesus Luzardo. Those are your 5. Sorry, Taijuan Walker. You just missed the cut. All right, I feel like I'm being a little mean to Taijuan Walker at this point. That is your starting 5 basketball terms. That's your 5-man rotation. Those guys are going to be arguably the best rotation in baseball. That's awesome. The strength of this team, as good as the offense can be, if they're selective about pitches, the strength of this team is going to be the rotation, and they are going to be absolutely freaking nasty. I'm telling you right now, this rotation is going to be dominant. Get ready. You're going to see some high-level pitching from the Philadelphia Phillies in the first couple of innings of games. Now, the bullpen is a little bit trickier because there is still that extra spot lurking back there in the back of the bullpen where you say, okay, I got 7 guys that I feel really good about. I don't know who that 8th guy is. There are a bunch of dudes on minor league deals that could turn into major league contracts that have major league experience. There's so many relievers in camp. This is one where it's very hard to figure out who it's going to be. I have the bullpen, the 7 guys that I'm sure of as following: Jose Ruiz, Jose Alvarado, Matt Strahm, Jordan Romero, Joe Ross, Orion Kerkering, Tanner Banks, and then there's that last spot. And for me, that last spot right now is going to Michael Mercado. And the only reason that I'm doing that is I think Michael Mercado is the closest to Major League Baseball ready. He pitched a couple innings last year. I don't know, he had like 14 innings last year. He had some good, he had some bad. He had like a 5-inning, 1-hit performance or 2-hit performance, and then he had a couple games where he got completely shelled. I don't know what the guy is, but he is a guy that is somewhat projectable to a reliever at the major league level. That's what the Phillies tried to do with him in AAA last year. He got opportunities. They were not the best opportunities in totality, but that's my best guess at this point. We're going to learn a lot more. And now we've only seen him play 2 spring training games. Sorry, 3. They played today, I believe. But like obviously rained out yesterday, which was unfortunate because you were going to see a lot of interesting guys in the lineup. But the relief pitcher stuff, whatever that 8th spot turns out to be, whether that's a short reliever, whether that's another swing man like Joe Ross, a guy that can eat up 3 innings. I don't know what the Phillies want to do with that spot. Right now I'm giving it to Michael Mercado, who not only is he a guy that threw for them last year, but he's a guy that also has versatility. He's started. He's been a reliever. Yeah, all of this in the minors. Now, I guess he technically has done it at the major league level, but I'm going off of what he's done in the minor leagues. And that's a guy that could give you more innings if you need it, could give you 1 inning if you need it. It seems to make sense to me. We will see how that all plays out. But like I said, no real surprises on this one. The big surprises are Weston Wilson I have in version 1 of my opening day roster prediction, making the roster, and Michael Mercado. But outside of that, Banks, Ross, Romero, Strahm, Alvarado, Ruiz, Kerkering, all absolute locks in the bullpen. Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Suarez, Luzardo, that's your rotation. Nothing's going to change that. Kepler, Marsh, Castellanos, that's your starting outfield. Schwarber, DH, going to be on the team. Rojas, I think he's got to be on the team. You can't leave that defense off. The infield 5, Harper, Stott, Turner, Bohm, Sosa, no doubts on any of those guys. And the catchers, JT, no doubt. Marchand, I'm telling you, no doubt Rafael Marchand is going to make this team just because options. You don't have an option to send it to the minor leagues. You don't want to lose him. Garrett Stubbs, you can play in AAA. That's a tough thing for Garrett Stubbs. And at some point, we're going to do a conversation on this podcast. We're going to have a segment about how tough is it going to be mentally for Garrett Stubbs? What does it change about the team as far as the mentality? he's an important locker room guy for this team. And if he starts the season in AAA or spends the season in AAA, how does that change stuff? But he's got an option. Marchand doesn't. You can't lose Marchand because you might need him in the future, depending on what's up with JT, who's in the final year of his deal. It just makes perfect sense to have that be the roster for the most part, with a couple of question marks in there. Guys like Cody Clemens or Buddy Kennedy or Cal Stevenson are going to be fighting for spots on the roster. And there's going to be a bevy of relievers that are looking for an opportunity to get that final spot in the Phillies bullpen. But that's what I like right now. We will see, again, as we dive deeper into spring training, see more games, see who's getting more opportunities, hear more information from reporters down there, from Rob Thompson, Dave Dombrowski, and Caleb Cotham, who's getting the opportunities. That's when we will start to update. But first, roster projection. And we're just going to do Tuesdays from now on will be opening day roster projections or updates to specific players who are on the bubble of the roster projection. So let me know in the comments what I got right. And I know for a fact you guys will let me know in the comments what you think I got wrong. But I love the feedback, and I love hearing where the fan base is at and your thoughts on that. Coming up next, we've got a very interesting list put out by The Athletic. The MLB All-Under 25 team. And there is one Philadelphia Philly on that list. I want you to think right now if you can guess who that is. I was asked this morning to guess it by someone at 97.5 The Fanatic, and I got it in 2 guesses. So there are a couple of guys that could potentially fit that spot, but take a guess. We will talk about it coming up. I will tell you why I think it's an awesome thing for this guy to be included in this list, even though it's some arbitrary list. He deserves to be on there. And, man, some of the names that he's on there with, it's pretty impressive. We'll talk about it next as we continue Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I went to the Sixers game last night. They got absolutely smoked by the Bulls. If I had live bet the Bulls when they were only up 10 and they end up going up 50 at one point, that's why live betting's so great, because you had a feel in that game early that the Sixers were going to get smoked. And that would have been a great opportunity for a great payout. That's why I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. There's a lot of great ways to make money on FanDuel. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so I want to talk about this MLB all 25-year-old team because it's not really a place where you'd expect to find a lot of Phillies. The core of this team is older. They're veteran players. There's guys that have been around a bunch. I mean, you even look at the starting position players and trying to think of guys under 25. I believe Stott's over 25. I know Bohm is. Obviously, Harper, Remuto, Castellanos, Schwarber, none of those guys involved. I think Marsh is above 25 at this point. The only position player that may have even feasibly made this list, well, not even feasibly, that was eligible to make the list would have been, I guess, Johan Rojas, like Rafael Marchand, but neither of those guys are going to make an all MLB top 25 team. They're just not that level of player yet. Maybe they could be one day, but not on the under 25 team because you only can be eligible for that for so long. So in my mind, when I was guessing this, I knew it had to be a pitcher. And my first thought is the guy that had the breakout year last year that the Philadelphia Phillies signed, and that's Christopher Sanchez. And then I realized, well, Christopher Sanchez is actually older than you think. I think he's 28 at this point. It took a long time through the minor league system and also has had his moments for 5 seasons now with the Philadelphia Phillies where he's been up and down as a reliever, turned into a starter. And that's just a reminder. Guys take time to develop. But I guess Christopher Sanchez, when I was posed this question today of who the guy is, and I was immediately told no. And my next guess was well, then it has to be this guy. You have it? Have you guessed it yet, Locked On Phillies fans? Yeah, it is Orion Kerkering out of the bullpen is on the MLB All-Under 25 team, according to Stephen J. Nesbitt of The Athletic. Now, again, just an arbitrary list. So take for this what you may. But look at some of the other, I'm going to read you some of the other relief pitcher names that you have on this team. Let's just start with the starters, guys that Ryan Kerkering is on this team being mentioned with. Paul Skeen's obviously on there, Spencer Schwellenbach of the Braves, Taj Bradley, Kyle Harrison, Jared Jones. These are some of the who's who of like these young up-and-coming pitchers that are going to be, teams think, top of rotation guys in the future. The bullpen, you've got a guy like Ben Joyce who's sitting 104. Justin Martinez, who's been solid for the Diamondbacks. Porter Hodge, great name. You might not know him from the Cubs. He's a guy that's an up-and-coming reliever. But the first name listed here is Ryan Kerkering at age 23. And he was on last year's All-Under 25 team by Steven Nesbitt. So this isn't even his first appearance on the list. Now, it's tough to find these guys under 25 because it's hard to make it to the majors and make any type of impact before you hit that age, especially as a relief pitcher where you got guys throwing into their 40s sometimes in bullpens, but late 30s is not uncommon for relief pitchers. So for a young player to break in, get that much opportunity, perform that well, and then get looked at to be a relief pitcher that's considered for an all under 25 team, that shows you just how quick Ryan Kerkering has elevated himself to getting recognition. But he did it last year. I mean, this is going to become, I'm telling you this year, this is going to become an Ryan Kerkering Stand podcast. This guy, I'm telling you, is special. Like what Andrew Painter, I think, is as a starting prospect, Ryan Kerkering could be as a bullpen prospect. Now, people talk about Andrew Painter as this next best thing, this top of the rotation, future ace guy that's going to maybe dominate the sport, but at least give the Philadelphia Phillies a bona fide number one for years to come. I think we should be talking about Ryan Kerkering the same way in the bullpen. Now, bullpen pitchers, you don't really give them like 10-year deals and lock them down forever and have the same guy in the pen year in and year out. Like they move around a little bit more because the contracts are weird and you normally do 1-year deals, and it's just a different position than starting pitcher. But if Ryan Kerkering is here long-term, he's still very much under team control. But if he's a guy that the Phillies go out and give, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5-year contract to say, hey, you're our closer for the foreseeable future at some point in the next 3 or 4 years, well, then that guy is going to be, think about it. You could get 3, 4, or 5 years out of a Ryan Kerkering before you even have to worry about the contract. I don't know off the top of my head how much team control he still has, how many years you have him under control. But, I mean, he's only been up for like a year and a couple of games. So what would that be? 3, 4, 5 more years about, if depending on how his contract's set up. You feel pretty darn good about that and where Ryan Kerkering stands as far as that's concerned. And then you give him another contract. I mean, this dude could be in the Phillies bullpen until 2033. I don't think that's outlandish to say. The next 8 years, that's not absurd. And if he's already this good at 23, where is a Ryan Kerkering going to be at 31? Wow, that's crazy. If he pitches for the next 8 years, he'll only be 31. He's going to be like right around the age that JT and Bryce Harper and them are now. Like that's nuts. And keep going, right? What if he pitches to 35 and all those years are with the Phillies organization and he's here till 2038 or whatever? I'm not a big math guy. I think that's only 3 more years. So let's just call it 2036. There's a chance that Ryan Kerkering becomes one of the great Philadelphia Phillies relievers. Now, I'm very much projecting out at that point. But when you have a guy on the all MLB under 25 team, or that's willing, like that a writer is going to put, and this is not like a league mandated team or anything, like a league sponsored team, but these guys do their research on the Athletic. That's a guy that could be projectable to change your organization. And it's hard for a relief pitcher to change your organization, but if you just have like a lockdown arm on the back end of this pen, you're always going to feel good about getting to the end of a game and taking care of stuff. And I don't know, we've talked in the past if Ryan Kerkering is the closer for the Philadelphia Phillies in the 2025 bullpen. Like, I don't know. I think it's Jordan Romano. That's my gut feeling. I don't think they're going to turn the keys over to a 23-year-old when you brought in Jordan Romano, who has like save experience at the major league level. But we know bullpens shift and roles change over the course of a season. If Romano falters, I think the next guy they give a chance to is Ryan Kerkering. And Romano's not going to be here forever. So if it's next year, if it's 2 years down the line, if it's 3 years down the line, at some point, Ryan Kerkering, you heard it here first, he's going to be the closer of this baseball team. and he's going to be a damn good one. And I'm very, very excited. Like, low-key sick year from Ryan Kirkering last year. Great stuff when he went from A-ball to the NLCS in the same year in 2023. It's just such a cool story that I don't think we talk about enough, because relief pitchers don't get the shine that they probably deserve at some points, because they're relief pitchers, and that's natural. They're not home run hitters. They're not guys going 7 innings. They're not throwing no hitters or complete game shutouts or having 10 strikeouts in a game. But as good as relief pitchers get, Ryan Kirkering he's not in that like A tier of major league relievers right now. When I talk about everybody, not just under 25, everybody, but he's a B tier reliever at 23 already. And when I say B tier, you're up there with some really darn good pitchers. So keep an eye on Kirkering this year. I'm going to be highlighting him as much as I can, as much as warranted. It's not going to be every day we're talking about a relief pitcher, like when he doesn't throw, or if he throws in like a 6-run deficit type of game or whatever. Like, no, but I am going to give him his flowers this year, because I think he's in for a monster season. Coming up next, we didn't do Mailbag Monday yesterday, obviously, because I had the dental appointment, so I didn't get an episode in. But we got a very interesting exercise as part of Mailbag Monday from a listener that I want to run through, because I just think it'll be fun. And it's also, it's spring training. They were rained out yesterday. There's just like, they're starting to feel everything out. And like, I know they played today, and Christopher Sanchez threw, and he looks solid. There's not very much to take this early in spring training from what they're doing. So I want to run through this exercise, because I think this will be fun for all ages of listeners to Locked On Phillies. I know sometimes we have folks that watch the Phillies in the 70s, 80s, 90s that listen to the podcast, watch the podcast, and we're always talking about modern day. I want to take a trip down, not so much down memory lane, but a little bit down memory lane. I'll explain the exercise to you coming up next as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, so we have this check-in here from Jason Allen McLean, who responded to the Mailbag Monday tweet on at LO_Phillies on X. And he says, "Hey, Connor, here's a fun thought experiment for you." So normally I'm used to just questions, but I like this. And he says, "Let's build a dream team of 26 Phillies players from the last 5 decades, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s. Pick 5 players from each decade, and then your last player can be from any decade." Now, I'm not going to do a full 26-man roster of all of those, but I'm going to do a starting lineup and a pitcher. And I'm going to go with guys from 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and the start of the 2020s. So I'll break down how we did it. I moved positions around, but could you imagine this line? Like, this lineup that I'm about to read you out is ridiculous. It shows you that the Phillies have had a good amount of talent in that time frame from the 80s to where we're at present day. Now, there have been some thin years, but ultimately there have been some all-time players in each of these decades. So let's run through. Now, this is not the batting order, but I'm going to go through in fielding order, starting at catcher and working my way around the infield and the outfield of where we're going to go. So the first guy that we're going to is the catcher of this team, no doubt. Like, now I couldn't just do like all players from the 2020s. I had to balance this out a little bit. So anyone who's like, well, there are other good catchers, like JT Realmuto, not on this team. Mike Lieberthal, not on this team. I'm not saying like those guys are not good, but with the other guys I wanted from the 2020s, the 2000s, the 2010s, those decades, there was no doubt that this guy was the catcher of this team to me. Darren Daulton is going to take the first spot from the 1990s, and he is going to be the catcher of this baseball team. Great leader, great player. Dutch, man, he was a man. So, yes, he's going to catch. That was an easy decision for me. This one's going to get tricky. Hold your horses, because, like I said, I'm going to be moving some positions around. Some guys are not going to play the number one position they played. Maybe that's cheating. Maybe it's not. I wanted to stack this roster. At first base, we're going to have another guy representing the 1990s. You hear him on the broadcasts all the time when you listen or when you watch the game on NBC Sports Philadelphia. John Kruk's playing first base for this team. Daulton the catcher, John Kruk at first. Whoever our pitcher is, who I'll tell you a little bit later on in this segment, if they want to throw at somebody, Dutch and Crocker will go get them before they get to the mound. But also, great hand-eye, great bat there from John Kruk, Darren Daulton, great leadership. Solid defense from both those guys. I like what you have there. We're going to move to second base, and this is where the 2000s or the 2010s, depending on where you want to put these guys, come in. I'm going to split these guys, actually. And I'm going to call this guy a 2010s guy, even though he played in the 2000s and he split decades. There's no doubt who my second baseman is. There's no doubt who my shortstop is. I got Chase Utley playing second. I got Jimmy Rollins playing shortstop. That was easy as it gets. Now, the reason why I had to split those guys up is I need a pitcher, and I'm going with a pitcher from the 2010s. So I guess the only guy truly from the 2000s, or actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make them both from the 2000s because I have two guys from the 2010s further down on this list. When guys cross over decades, it's hard to make this work. But two guys from the 2000s, Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley, that's my middle infield. Unbelievable, one of the best middle infield pairings in the history of the Philadelphia Phillies. Both fringe Hall of Famers. I hope both get in one day. We will see. But right now, the team of Dutch, Cracker, Utley, Rollins, yeah, it's pretty darn good. And if you have any doubts about who's the third base, you're crazy because the 1980s is included in this list. So my third baseman is the best third baseman in the history of the sport. Michael Jack Schmidt, get over there at the hot corner. How about that infield, huh? And you might say, well, where's Ryan Howard? It's crazy. Yeah, I had to pick certain guys for certain decades, and I like Jimmy and Chase up the middle, and you had other options at first base better than what you had at second and shortstop. But Mike Schmidt's playing third. That's a pretty darn good infield. The outfield is where we go off the rails a little bit. Before we get to the outfield, I am putting a DH here because we now have the universal DH. My DH is Kyle Schwarber because I needed another guy from the 2020s, and he seems to make sense. He's been a great DH for this team. So Schwarber DHs. In left field, I've got Pete Rose. Now, I know Pete Rose, you think of him as an infielder. He also played some corner outfield at points. It's not going to be the best defensive outfield, but I need Pete Rose on this team. I need him as one of those 1980s guys, and Pete Rose is going to be the left fielder of this decade-split Philadelphia Phillies lineup. In center field, I'm going back to the 2010s, actually the first one from the 2010s, because I counted Rollins and Utley as 2000s, as the aughts. I don't know why they call it the aughts, but you know that decade, 2000 to 2010. This next guy, Shane Victorino, is going to be the starting center fielder for this team. I could have gone different places. Gary Maddox technically played in the 80s, but I wanted Schmidt. I wanted Pete Rose. So I'm going to take Shane Victorino. I think Shane is a awesome center fielder for this team because he had some defense out there in center. He had some speed on the base pass. Also a great locker room guy. You need that for this clubhouse, even though a lot of these guys are great locker room guys. And then right field, well, you know who's going to be my right fielder. He plays first base now, but if I can move him around and make it easy so I can get John Kruk on the team, then I'm going to play my guy, Bryce Harper, out there in right field. Harper was a must pick. Schmidt was a must pick. Pete Rose was a must pick. That's why Rose and Harper are now in the corner outfield spots because I had to find ways to get them on the team, but there were other players with other positions that I liked. The outfield, we know, historically for the Philadelphia Phillies hasn't exactly been stacked. The infield, you've got some much better players there when we talk about like the greats of the past decades. And then we get to our starting pitcher. And I've only got one guy technically from the 2010s on here, if we're counting that decade. If you know anything about me, if you've followed this podcast, you know who my starting pitcher for this team is. Roy Halladay, take the mound. Roy Halladay is my favorite pitcher of all time. He's the most dominant pitcher I've ever watched wear a Philadelphia Phillies uniform. Now, remember, I was born in 1994, so I didn't really start comprehending baseball until, I don't know, 2002, 2003 was when I first started to really kind of watch games and go to games and stuff like that. But Roy Halladay is on the bump for me. So just go back through the decades. My 80s guys, Mike Schmidt, Pete Rose, third base and left field. My 90s guys, Darren Daulton, John Kruk at catcher and first base. My 2000s guys, Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley up the middle playing shortstop and second base respectively. My 2010s guys, Shane Victorino in center, Roy Halladay as pitcher, and my 2020s guys, Harper in right field, Schwarbs as the DH. That team is absolutely unbelievable. So it'll show you that the Phillies have had some star power over the past 40 years or so, which I don't think anyone was doubting. But it also remind you that how some of the great players in our game over that time frame wore the red pinstripe. So fun little exercise. I know that was one of those exercises, one of those segments where I don't want to call you the old heads, but I'll call you the old heads, folks that watch the 80s and 90s teams and remember those days and want me to mention every once in a while Michael Jack Schmidt or guys that played back in the day on that team, guys in the 90s, Dutch and Crucker, and talk about him, not like what John Kruk said on the broadcast, but like what he did with the Philadelphia Phillies. So there you have it. If you would change anything about that lineup, let me know in the comments, but it is a fun little exercise that we went through in spring training. So it's fun to just do these hypothetical stuff. Shout out to, again, Jason Allen McLean on Twitter, who sent me that prompt that we just ran through there. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. We'll get back with you tomorrow, do a little bit of a check-in down in Clearwater, and we're also going to talk a little bit more about some ancillary parts of the broadcast. The Phillies' new score bug, yeah, we're going to talk about it. And also this figuring out of the ABS system. It's going to be a story throughout spring training. We're going to talk about it a bunch on this podcast as they try and figure out the ups and downs of using that system. But that's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, we come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. And I'll talk to you tomorrow on our next episode.